6 months and 11 days. That is the span between the murder of Tupac Shakur in Las Vegas on September the 7th, 1996, and the murder of Notorious Big in Los Angeles on March the 9th, 1997. The two greatest rappers who ever lived, the twin towers of the genre, killed inside one calendar year, both cases unsolved to this day. The 90s ended as the decade that took the King of the West and the King of the East, and the genre has spent 30 years living in the shadow of that arithmetic. Those two deaths begin this list, but they do not end it. The 90s buried more than the famous names. These are the 10 saddest deaths in 90s hip-hop history. Tupac Shakur, September the 7th, 1996, Las Vegas. After the Tyson fight at the MGM Grand, a brief altercation in the lobby, then the BMW at the red light on Flamingo Road, the Cadillac on the right, 13 rounds fired. Tupac died 6 days later at University Medical Center. He was 25. The reason his death stands at the top of every list the genre keeps is the totality of what was lost. He was the best writer of his generation and its biggest movie star, the son of a Black Panther carrying politics the mainstream had banished, a man who could make a dance record and a revolution record on the same album. The last year of his life was the most productive in the genre history, and the vault he left has supplied releases for 3 decades. Suge Knight sat beside him in the car. Nobody has ever been charged. The aftermath deserves its own paragraph, because the loss kept compounding. The label he had built carried the vault, and the releases kept arriving for decades, each one reopening the wound for a new generation, and the city of Las Vegas has spent 30 years not answering the question. The books and documentaries have assembled the theories: the occupants of the Cadillac, the witnesses who went silent, the informants whose statements went unexplored, and the through line of all of them is the same. The biggest murder in music history was solved by everybody except the people with the power to arrest. Tupac died at the peak of his powers with the whole future ahead, and the genre has spent longer mourning him than he spent alive, and the mourning is the only case that ever closed. Notorious Big, March the 9th, 1997, Los Angeles. The party at the Peterson Automotive Museum, the SUV at the red light on Wilshire, the Impala that pulled alongside, the 4 bullets. He was 24. The reason the two deaths must always be told together is the way the culture received them, as a single tragedy in 2 acts, a war that the industry monetized until the industry lost both of its greatest soldiers. Life After Death, his double album, arrived in stores 16 days after the murder and went to #1, and the cover showed him standing beside a hearse. The Los Angeles Police Department never closed the case, and the lawsuits by his family exposed police connections to the suspects that the department has never explained. Voletta Wallace buried her son and spent the rest of her life asking the city for the answer. The detail that makes the two murders one story is the timing everyone felt at the time. The Coastal War had been cooling. The interviews from the final weeks show 2 men trying to step off the wheel, talking about business and films and futures. The industry that profited from the feud lost both of its pillars before the peace could arrive, and the peace, when it came, was a silence with no one left to break it. The 90s charts belonged to the two of them, and the century of rap that followed has been the effort to fill the space they left, with no success, because the space is the shape of 2 specific men. Big L, February the 15th, 1999, Harlem. 9 shots on 139th Street, the retaliation connected to his brother. He was 24. The reason the 90s owed him more than it paid is the position he held. The best pure lyricist in New York, the man the greatest rappers studied, killed weeks before the Rockefeller deal that was forming around him. His debut had underperformed commercially, and the industry that missed him in life canonized him in death, and the pattern became the genre's saddest tradition, the genius recognized by everyone except the marketplace, in time. The Big Picture, assembled from the vault, arrived in 2000 and went gold, proof of the audience that had been one campaign away. The detail that completes the heartbreak is the tape that circulated for years before the deal talk got serious. The stretch of fire verses over industry beats that every New York head passed around. The audition the whole city had already passed him on. His brother was in prison when it happened, and the family has spoken about the weight of that arrangement, a retaliation intended for someone else landing on the man whose only crime was the name he shared. Harlem named a street festival after him in the years since, and the block that took him holds him up now as the standard, the proof that the city could produce the best writer of the era with no machine behind him, and lose him to the machine the era could not stop. Eazy-E, March the 26th, 1995, Los Angeles. The godfather of gangsta rap walked into Cedars-Sinai, believing he had asthma, and left the world 10 days later, from complications of AIDS. He was 30. The reason his death carries a specific 90s weight is the era. 1995 was the year the treatment breakthrough arrived. The protease inhibitors that turned HIV from a death sentence into a chronic condition, and Eazy died months before the wave reached the general public. He made his announcement from his hospital bed, telling the world to get tested, writing a final message to his fans with his own hand. The man who funded the record that started gangsta rap, the businessman who built an empire from a neighborhood the industry would not enter, died in the window between the old world and the medicine. The final statement he dictated from the hospital is the reason his death belongs on every list of this kind. He wrote to his fans without self-pity, described the illness plainly, urged the community to get tested, and closed with a message about carrying on. The statement reads today like the most adult document the era produced, a dying man spending his final words on public health for the people the country had stopped educating. The 10 days between the announcement and the death are the shortest distance on this list between silence and forever, and the community that heard him say "get tested" heard him in a way no campaign has matched since. Freaky Ta, March the 28th, 1999, Queens. The Lost Boys hype man was shot outside the Jamaica Queens hotel party at 27, standing beside Mr. Cheeks. The reason his death belongs in the 90s canon is the sound he carried. The Lost Boys records were the soundtrack of the summer parks and the uptown parties, and Freaky Ta was the energy in them, the ad-libs, and the presence that made the records feel live. The group never recovered the formula. Mr. Cheeks carried the name forward as a solo act and had hits, but the chemistry that made the 90s Queens sound was a triangle, and the third point was gone. Queens lost him and Big L within 6 weeks of each other, and the borough closed the decade burying two of its brightest voices. Scott LaRock, August the 27th, 1987, The Bronx. The founder and DJ of Boogie Down Productions, shot at 25 trying to defuse a dispute involving his crew, months after the release of Criminal Minded. The reason the 80s death belongs on the 90s list is the timeline it started. The genre lost its first architect before the second album, and KRS-One built the Stop the Violence movement from the grave, and the conscious tradition that the 90s inherited was founded in the grief of 1987. Every 90s artist who made a record about peace was standing on the foundation that a murdered DJ laid with one album. Charizma, December the 16th, 1993, San Jose. The young rapper signed to Hollywood Records with his producer Peanut Butter Wolf, shot in a carjacking at 20, before his shelved debut could be released. The reason his death is the quietest entry on this list is what grew from it. Peanut Butter Wolf founded Stone's Throw Records in the aftermath, naming the label as a memorial, and released the shelved recordings as Big Shots in 2003. The label became one of the most important in independent music history, the home of MF Doom and J Dilla and Madlib, and the entire catalog is dedicated to the friend who died in 1993. The 90s lost an artist and gained an institution, built from the loss. DJ Subrock, April the 19th, 1993, Long Island. Subrock, the younger brother and production partner of MF Doom in the group KMD, was struck and killed while crossing the Long Island Expressway at 19. The reason his death changed the genre is the sequence it triggered. KMD was dropped by Elektra weeks later over the controversy of their album cover. Doom disappeared for years, and the man who returned was the masked figure the culture came to know. The villain origin story, the metal mask, the mythology, all of it grew from the Expressway and the label decision that followed. The greatest underground career in rap history was built by a grieving brother who could no longer show his face. The sequence belongs in a novel. Subrock dies in April. Elektra drops the group weeks later, spooked by the album art controversy, and pulls the finished record from release. Doom resurfaces years later, homeless by his own account, sleeping on floors in Manhattan, writing the verses that became Operation Doomsday. The mask he adopted for the return was the protection of a man who had lost his brother, his deal and his name in a single season, and the culture received the masked figure as a hero without always knowing the funeral underneath. The 90s buried Subrock and invented Doom, and the two events were the same event. Tupac has a companion the lists forget. Yafiu Fula, young noble of the Outlaws Circle, November the 10th, 1996. 2 months after Pac died, Yaki Kadafi, the Outlaws member who was in the car behind the BMW on the night of the shooting, and reportedly the witness closest to the gunman, was found dead in New Jersey, with a gunshot to the head. He was 19. The case was closed as an accident among friends, a story the family never fully accepted. The reason his death belongs on the list is the witness problem. The person positioned to know what happened in Vegas was dead within 2 months, and the Las Vegas investigation never obtained the testimony that the man in the following car might have given. The biggest unsolved murder in music history lost its closest witness inside a year. The family and the groupmates have spoken about the 2 months between the two deaths, the grief, the chaos, the young men scattered across states with no protection, and the official finding of accident among friends has never satisfied anyone who has examined the timeline. The Outlaws carried both names forward for 30 years, performing the catalog, keeping the circle alive, and the interviews with the surviving members circle back to the same unanswerable pair of questions. What did the following car see, and why did the world lose the man most likely to answer, 64 days after the first loss? The 90s kept stacking its questions on top of its coffins, and this entry is the starkest example. Big Pun, February the 7th, 2000, White Plains, the first Puerto Rican rapper to go platinum, the Bronx technician with the breath control, the engineers still study, died of a heart attack during a respiratory crisis at 280 pounds over his fighting weight. He was 28. The reason the 90s list claims him is the calendar, weeks before the decade formally ended, and the reason his death breaks the heart is the family aftermath. The apartment, the wife and children he left in the Bronx, the reports that the money had not reached them, the benefit concerts held to pay the rent. The greatest Latino flow in the history of the genre, and his estate could not cover the funeral without help. 10 deaths, 10 different kinds of loss, the two kings in an unsolved war, the best lyricist on his own block, the Godfather weeks before the medicine, the voice of the Queen's summer, the first architect before the genre turned 10, the shelved album that built a label, the brother whose death built a mask, the witness who died before the questions, the giant whose family could not bury him. The 90s were the decade the genre became the biggest music on earth, and the price of the ascension is the list you just heard. The music from that decade is the canon, played at every party, quoted in every verse. The obituaries are the fine print. If one of these names made you pause, write it in the comments, subscribe, because this channel keeps the receipts the culture forgot.